Hello, I'm Peter Van Dusen, and this is Primetime Politics on CPAC. We are the cable public affairs channel. Our focus for the next half hour is the national inquiry into murdered and missing Indigenous women. The government today wrapped up its cross-country consultations with the families of murdered and missing women, getting their input for the scope and objectives of the inquiry. The Minister of Indigenous Affairs and the Minister for the Status of Women have been traveling the country since December, meeting some 1,300 people who want answers to what happened to their loved ones. Well, today the ministers, Carolyn, Bennett and Hajdu, met with reporters here in Ottawa at the conclusion of the consultation process.
As you know, today is the conclusion of the formal consultations with families and with some of the frontline workers. I think that today we will have heard from around 2,000 participants and well over 3,000 online. So this has been with tremendously important advice as to what the Commission needs to do and look like going forward in order to meet the needs and the expectations of the families. We are will then move into this deliberative stage where we are going to take everything we've heard and try and turn it into a very different inquiry than Canada has ever seen before, but with the work of the Minister of Justice, and Minister Hajdu, as well as Minister of Public Safety, Minister Philpott, we are going to, this is definitely a whole of government exercise. Today was very poignant for me. We had so many people here today that we've divided the consultation in two. I stayed with the Inuit as the Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs, and that certainly was very poignant. People came huge distances to be able to be with us today. We had been in Iqaluit, as you know, but today we saw people from all over Western Arctic to Labrador and all of the Inuit communities. It was very poignant in that I think their message is that they may be remote, but they can't be forgotten. Their unique situation has meant that you know, even in places like Labrador, where if they're calling to report a violent episode, they get an answering machine that's answered in St. John's. They don't have services that speak Inuktitut, and the real lack of healing and the way that that in terms of mental health services from hamlet to hamlet to hamlet, it was there was hope. I think that they most of them felt that being able to come together with other people that had the same experience through the orientation yesterday and then today made them feel that they weren't alone, that they had felt that they were totally alone in this, and I think that it's, but again, we heard that the lack of satisfaction with the justice system, the murders that they felt were a murder that were labeled a suicide, and therefore there would not be any investigation. And in small communities, to think that a murderer is out in their community made them feel very unsafe, and clearly yet again saying there is no justice. And so I think that it was this idea that they are the forgotten Inuit. We found particularly poignant. Maybe Minister Hajdu will just tell you what happened in the other big room.
Many of the themes were the same, and much as Minister Bennett's indicated, concerns about the investigation, the response, and then the investigation of their loved one's disappearance or murder. But in particular, some of the most moving testimony today came from the orphans, people that had been left behind by the death of their parent, placed into the Child Protection Service system, people that had grown up in CPS, Child Protection Systems, who who were estranged from their family, who later found out their birth mother or their mother had been murdered. People would have had their children apprehended as a result of the post-traumatic stress that they experienced as due to the loss of their loved one. There were a lot of tears, and in particular, at the very end, one woman asked me, and I feel profoundly honored to do this, to remind all of those children that their parents love them, and that they know that their children in some cases have been told that their parents don't love them. And there's generations of this, and she wanted me particularly to send the message to all of those children that they are loved. And I found that an incredibly moving message, and it's my honor to repeat that to you. And I hope that you'll take that out to those children.
Thank you. We'll proceed to questions in English, after that in French. First question?
You say this is going to be a very different inquiry in Canada as ever seen. In what way?
I think because it has a very serious piece of work to do. It's not court-ordered like the TRC was. We are going to have to find some, that there's a real pressure that some of these cases have to be looked at. But also we want to make sure that what we learned at Ipperwash, what we learned from the TRC, how do we make this culturally safe and involving of the families, involving the elders, that this has to be a process that Indigenous people feel comfortable participating in.
Culturally safe, what does that mean?
Culturally safe means it means that the Inuit need to have ceremony, the Métis need to have ceremony, First Nations need to have ceremony, and it's different in different parts of this country. That is very important in terms of cultural safety, but it also what we keep hearing, it needs to be trauma-informed. Mm-hmm. It means that you actually need to understand that a lot of these people do have post-traumatic stress disorder, have had unfortunate sequelae from residential schools to this situation that they've just been through. And so we need to make sure that people aren't re-victimized, aren't harmed without support. And so as I think the TRC did very well in making sure there's the kind of support and health support, mental health support, as people go through this process.
Next question.
Omar Sashina, CTV News. Minister, I just wanted to know a little bit about specifics in terms of timelines and next steps, and also how much closer are you to telling us who's going to be heading this thing?
As you know, we had committed to hopefully be able to launch the proper commission by the summer. There is going to have to be a lot of work done with the provinces and the territories. As you know, we feel very strongly we want this to be a national public inquiry, as the provinces and territories ask for, not just a federal public inquiry. So that means that we have to work with our counterparts in the provinces and the territories. And so hopefully by the end of the month at the roundtable on missing and murdered Indigenous women that will take place in Winnipeg, we get to have some of those conversations with the provinces and the territories. It is we don't know yet who will be the commissioner or commissioners. We have kept an open mind through this whole process. We had to say to people, if you for 1 minute thought we'd already made up our mind, then how authentic or genuine is this process? And so we have kept a complete open mind until now, as we will start to close down the discussion guide responses by the end of next week, I guess, or the end of the month, and then we will, as ministers, begin the deliberative work of what's next. I think we also, all of us, are very keen that as we come to the budget and come to the kinds of things that we can do right now, we're not going to wait till the end of a 2-year commission to get going on the things that we've heard are urgent now around housing and shelter space and racism and sexism in policing, on the child welfare system that, as you know, with the Human Rights Tribunal, we've got to get to work on right away.
And just quickly, on behalf of my colleagues in Barrie, the chief of the Beausoleil First Nation has said that
I can't take that question today. That's not fair to the families.
Okay, but can you say anything about it privately later? Are you aware of the issue?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, sir.
Martin Stream from CPAC. What about when the United Nations officials came in, and they had a lot of praise for setting up this commission, but they had a lot of concern, too, that it be hands-off. So you're still at an early stage, but several of the people we interviewed said they're concerned that you get this up and running, but you not have strings attached, and that this be totally independent.
Absolutely. This is completely arm's length from government. That's our job, is to pick the commissioner or commissioners, to lay out the terms of reference and get them the budget that they will require to do a proper piece of work.
Just looking at you, Minister Hajdu, I can, I want to say I can almost see it on your face today, the heaviness on your face today. I know, Minister Bennett, as well, you've been traveling right across the country and going through sessions like this on a number of occasions. So I'm wondering if you can, as ministers, paint a picture of what this is like for you to interact with these families, and is there a heaviness for you as you go through this process as a minister?
Well, thanks for nearly making me cry. There is. I'm no stranger to these stories. Let me just start by saying that. I mean, having worked in Thunder Bay on this, in the streets, in the trenches, essentially running a low barrier shelter for men, women, and youth, daily I heard stories like this and witnessed personally violence. So it's not like I'm a stranger to these stories, but I think. I don't want to speak for Minister Bennett, but I think that if you're truly doing this job well, you need to be able to bear witness to that pain, and you need to be able to empathize without losing yourself in the grief. And it's a very delicate balance, actually, to be there, to be present, to listen, to empathize, but to not let it become about you is really my job. To know that it is our shared responsibility to hear these stories as Canadians, but that I need to do it in a respectful way.
I think in some ways the hardest part is the hope that a lot of these participants are expressing, that they're actually talking to people who can make a difference in their lives, and the responsibility that we feel that we have to put the concrete actions in place that will stop this tragedy. And so I think it's the responsibility we feel that I don't think we've been at one hearing where someone hasn't said this has to stop. And so that is, I think, where we take the gravity of this situation and our I think it's just redoubled our commitment to actually make it stop.
And just as a follow-up, there is an Aboriginal community in mourning today in Lac-Simon, and I'm wondering, to what degree do you think violence that's going on within communities, to what degree do you think that violence could become a centerpiece or a part of this inquiry as you proceed with your work?
I think that we we know from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that the link between residential schools and child abuse, and that leads to addiction, leads to incarceration, leads to violence, is part and parcel of really the colonial legacy of our country. And so it is going to be really important that we deal with that head on, that this is about things that have to change and people that are hurting. So, hurt people. And that's what we've been living.
Just to follow up on that, Minister, how closer are you at the end of all these pre-consultations to determining your mandate? And to follow up on Christy's question, does Lex Simon, or whatever you heard in those pre-consultations, tell you that maybe you also need to look at not only women being violence, but men being violence or committing violence? Do men need to be part of this inquiry as well?
Absolutely, and I think we've said for a long time that this isn't a women's issue. It's not an Indigenous issue. It's a Canadian issue. But there's no question that men and boys need to see themselves in this process in terms of what the root causes of this have been, and how we turning this around with the help of men and boys.
And in terms of timelines, are you closer to announcing the mandate, or will the mandate be announced when you start the inquiry? When can we get some news, I guess?
Well, I think that we are hoping that when we launch the commission, that will be the time that the terms of reference and the commissioners, and there will be an outline of the preferred process.
When's that?
Hopefully by the summer.
Okay, so same time. Okay,
Minister Bennett, you talked a bit about the justice system being a problem a lot of people talked about, but can you tell us a bit more about what other recommendations families are making?
Mainly the families want to continue to be involved. I think that they feel that many times that there needs to be an advisory council of families like there was with the TRC and the survivors. I think I would say a lot of them want some of the cold cases to be opened. They don't feel satisfied, and as we've said many times, that particularly if their loved one's death was deemed an accident or an overdose or a suicide, when they, in their heart of hearts, believed their loved one was murdered, that they can't rest until they know.
Can they be a part of the inquiry going forward after this consultation process is over?
Well, I think that, again, as we look to some of the suggestions around a family advisory committee, but also I think we're also hearing that the families are very clear that coast to coast to coast, the situation is different, and therefore the solutions or the recommendations may well be different. So we're hearing very strongly from the families that there need to be local nodes that will actually be able to help with the inquiry and make sure that the recommendations are suited to their own situation, that a pan-Canadian approach we are hearing will not work. Even though a lot of the root causes are the same, coast to coast to coast, the actual situation in which these families find themselves may be quite different. And I think that the frontline workers are saying the same thing. So meeting with the frontline workers in the downtown east side on Saturday morning, they have some very, very different views than what we would hear in Iqaluit or places where there's issues around remoteness or transportation or other things.
Yes, you talked about cold cases just there, and also about murders potentially being labeled as suicides or overdoses. So there's obviously a lot of families who want their own individual cases to be looked at. But you're looking at about 1,200 cases here. So are you concerned that those people are being set up for disappointment? I mean, how realistic is the expectation that they're going to get into these 1,200 individual cases and shed new light on them?
Well, I think that will be the job of the commissioners to sort out what they feel they can do about these, but it's bigger than 1,200, way bigger than 1,200. I mean, in Calgary, right, Minister Hajdu, that you know, to listen to some of the families from Siksika First Nation know that there are many missing and murdered from their own community that isn't listed in the numbers we have. But we also have to add to this the survivors, that when we talk about families, we haven't been focused on the people who know it could have been them, it was almost them, people who ran away from the Picton farm, people who woke up after having been strangled, and so, you know, when you look at the real depth and breadth of this tragedy, it's way bigger than we had thought.
Well, that begs the question. The Aurora case was $30 million for an inquiry. Just one man's case, it took a year. Now you've got 1,200 cases, and you're saying it's way bigger than even that. So how would you be able to do more than just scratch the surface or talking generalities about this?
Well, I think this will be the commissioners are going to have to sort out are there cases that really should be reopened, and so you know, I think some of these cases are 40 years old, and there is some completeness that some feel, but others, you know, I think that even as we see the two from Toronto, in terms of the balcony deaths, that again, there doesn't seem to be any satisfaction there. But I mean, in Halifax, I think we'd heard, you know, somebody shot in the back of the head was called a suicide. This is, you know, so, you know, I think people do want to know what happened, that all of a sudden there's no investigation because it was designated some natural causes or overdose or suicide or an accident.
Last question, English.
You were both knowledgeable about this matter before you were, you know, heard from what you said, 2,000 people in person and thousands more online. I'm wondering, from what you heard from the families and loved ones, were there any particular things that came up that pieces of advice that came up that you didn't necessarily expect, but it surprised you, or that perhaps we don't know about? I'm just wondering if there's anything that surprised you.
I don't know if there's anything that specifically surprised us, but there were really practical suggestions about what we can do during the process and what the process has to consider, how it should be led, and what types of people need to lead it. So it's not, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily shocking, but certainly very, very useful information. And themes started to evolve, which I think was the really important piece, is that sometimes if you speak to one group of people, and you have 15 different messages, it's difficult to prioritize. But when you speak to 2,000 people and those themes start to emerge, that's when you know that you're onto something, and that there are definite streams of thought about what types of people should lead the inquiry, what kinds of things should be examined by the inquiry, what we should do about cold cases. How do we address the needs of orphans and the needs of families and communities in crisis right now? And so I think the value in this broad consultation was really making sure that we identified those themes to the fullest capacity. In research science, it's called an adequate sample set, and really that's what you need to do. Is you need lots of data so that you can start to identify what those themes are.
I think that from the day we launched December 8th to the first consultation with Minister Hajdu in Thunder Bay, we were very surprised in Thunder Bay about the voices of the survivors. And we had to redo the web page to make sure that survivors knew that they were welcome, and in some places they hadn't felt welcome. In places like Manitoba, the survivors had felt they were sort of outsiders, and so I think that was quite a, in our original conception, I don't think we thought that those really thought of those voices in the same way that we now know they're essential to getting this right.